The first burst of gunfire tore through the dawn like a rip in the earth itself, sharp, metallic, merciless. It echoed across the dry plateau long before anyone could see the thin line of dust rising from the enemy's march. And inside the battered stone outpost, where the sandbags slumped like tired shoulders and the smell of oil clung to the air, Captain Aria Senko stood behind her mounted machine gun, staring into the pale light as if she could command it to hold. Her hands were steady, but something in her jaw trembled. Not fear, her men knew, but the weight of a decision she had carried alone through the long, sleepless night. "Ma'am," Sergeant Dalen whispered beside her, "they're coming in formation." "Looks like 3 columns. I see them," Aria replied quietly. "Let them come closer, save your fire." The outpost, an abandoned geological survey station reshaped with barbed wire and patched steel, sat on the ridge above the Targov Pass, the only navigable breach between the Colmar highlands and the river country below. The war had dragged on for years, turning fertile farms into trenches and villages into ruins. But this pass, this solitary cut between stone, was the key to the capital. And the capital was the key to everything that had not yet burned. Aria Senko had not always been a soldier. Years before, she had been a linguist, one of the youngest cultural officers the Republic had ever commissioned. She spoke 4 dialects of the northern provinces, cataloged oral histories, and trained reconciliation teams. A mediator, her mother used to say proudly, never a fighter. But when the insurgency turned into a full-scale civil war, when the northern militias seized the radio towers and declared their own state, Aria became something she had never expected. A strategist whose fluency in her enemy's songs, stories, and fears gave her a sharper weapon than any rifle. Her rise had been as unlikely as it was swift. Commanders noticed her ability to read a village's mood before a shot was fired, to predict troop shifts from subtle changes in militia broadcasts, and to negotiate ceasefires that held, at least until larger forces shattered them. But the war hardened everyone, and as the militias fractured into more violent factions, Aria adapted too. She learned terrain, fortifications, sabotage, how to turn history into a map of patterns and probability. Some called her the scholar captain, others more quietly called her dangerous. And now at 33, she stood in a forgotten outpost with 23 soldiers facing nearly 400 rebels under Commander Radek Vorn, a man she had once interviewed for a research paper during peacetime. Back then, he had been a community leader, a storyteller with a booming laugh. But war had shaped him differently, into someone brutal, someone who believed unity could be forged only through fire. Aria had been ordered to retreat 2 nights earlier. The ridge was considered untenable, but retreating meant opening the pass. Opening the pass meant the capital would fall, so she countermanded the order, sent the evacuation convoy south with the wounded, and remained with her small unit. When the radio crackled with demands for her withdrawal, she simply said, "Outpost 7 will hold until relieved." And then she turned the radio off. Now, dawn spread its thin blue veil across the plateau as the rebels approached in columns. Disciplined, confident, convinced that the outpost was an obstacle rather than a threat. Aria watched them for a long moment, feeling the gravity of it settle in her bones. She had known peace once, but peace had not known how to survive men like Radek Vorn. Behind her, Private Elam shifted nervously. "Captain, are we really doing this? Just us against all of them?" Aria leaned into the gun, eyes narrowing. "We're not just us," she said. "We're the pass. Whoever holds this ground holds the war." The rebels' drums began to beat, low, steady thuds that vibrated over the stones. It was psychological warfare as old as the tribes of the highlands. Aria recognized the rhythm. It was the march of reclamation, the same beat she had recorded in her early field notes. Back then, she had admired its ancient defiance. Now she listened to it as a death knell. "They're close," Dalen murmured. "Steady," Aria said. "Wait for the 3rd horn." When the horn sounded, long and guttural, Aria squeezed the trigger. The machine gun roared to life, rattling through her arms like a living creature. Brass casings spilled down the sandbags as her first sweeping volley tore into the front ranks, shredding the confident march into chaos. Her squad followed with rifle fire from the flanks, hitting the rebels as they scrambled behind boulders and makeshift shields. The outpost shook with return fire. Bullets sparked off the metal plates welded to the stone walls, and fragments of rock stung Aria's cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She tracked movement, cut down advancing fighters, shifted angles to break their attempts to form a charging wedge.
Second column moving to the east rise.
Dalen shouted. Mortars ready, Aria called. Elam and 2 others positioned the mortar tubes, waiting for her signal. She adjusted her sights, studied the enemy's distribution. The rebels were attempting a pincer, but the terrain worked against them. Steep shale on one side, loose gravel on the other. Aria had anticipated this. She had spent all night memorizing every contour of the ridge. Fire, she ordered. 3 mortars arced beautifully before thundering down on the eastern rise, blasting the rebels off their foothold. Dust plumed skyward, mixing with smoke and morning mist. For a moment, the battlefield was nothing but swirling gray. The rebels regrouped faster than her soldiers expected. Radek Vorn's voice carried across the plateau in the northern dialect, a rare thing during battle. Hold your ground, press forward. Their numbers are nothing. Aria understood every word, each one sharpened into command. She felt an old ache in her chest hearing his voice. Once she had admired his conviction. Now it was the very thing scorching the land. Dalen ducked as bullets peppered the wall. Captain, they've got a heavy gun on the north slope. Aria turned. A rebel team had set up a belt-fed weapon behind a shielded position. Its angle threatened to sweep the entire courtyard of the outpost. I'll take it, she said immediately. Ma'am, that's insane. Cover me. She grabbed a smoke canister, yanked the pin, and hurled it toward the slope. As gray billowed outward, she sprinted from the safety of the wall, feet pounding over loose rock. The air whistled with bullets slicing through smoke. She slid behind a jagged outcrop, clenched her teeth, and angled her rifle around the edge. Through the thinning smoke, she spotted the gun team. 3 rebels loading, aiming, firing. She exhaled, steady and controlled. 1 breath, 1 shot. The loader dropped. Another breath, another shot. The spotter fell sideways. The gunner scrambled to turn the weapon toward her, but she was already firing. 3 rounds that struck true. The heavy gun fell silent. Aria sprinted back under covering fire, leaping over debris and sliding into the outpost courtyard as cheers erupted from her soldiers. You're out of your mind, Dalen muttered, trying not to grin. Only on odd days, Aria replied, catching her breath. But the respite lasted only seconds. A new sound rose from the plateau. Deep, trembling, mechanical. Trucks and not empty ones. Aria climbed to the outer parapet, wiping grit from her eyes, and stared down the pass. She saw the enemy's reinforcements long before her soldiers did. Armored trucks with improvised plating, each carrying a dozen fighters, rolled forward in a staggered line. Dust curled behind them like the tail of a storm. Her stomach tightened. The rebels were committing their full strength. Elam, she called. Get the last of the mines ready. We only have 4 left. Place them on the western ridge path. Make them hidden but tight. They'll try to flank with the trucks. He nodded shakily and ran. Aria watched the slow advance, mind racing. The rebels were adapting quickly. Radek Vorn wasn't merely throwing men at the ridge, he was testing it. Probing weaknesses, strategizing with cold precision. That meant he was here. Watching her, studying her. The next assault began with coordinated fire from the trucks. Their mounted guns spat long strings of bullets that hammered the outpost walls. Aria had to duck as stone fragments rained down. Her soldiers scrambled between firing positions, returning shots where they could. Then the infantry advanced again. But this time they moved in disciplined squads, leapfrogging positions under covering fire. Standard military tactics, not the looser militia style she had known years earlier. Radek had drilled them hard. Aria grabbed the field glasses. She searched the lines, and then she saw him, standing atop a truck, shouting orders, his coat whipping in the wind like a war banner. Radek Vorn, the man who had once spoken passionately about cultural preservation, now leading an assault with none of the compassion he once embodied. So it comes to this, she murmured to herself. The rebels surged toward the western ridge, exactly where she expected them to go. Elam's mines detonated in sequence, throwing metal into the air. Flames twisted around the wreckage of one truck, its remaining ammunition cooking off in sharp cracks. Her soldiers whooped in triumph, but Aria didn't celebrate. She knew what Radek would do next. Brace the front gate, she shouted. They'll push straight through now. The rebels charged, screaming battle cries in the old dialect. They carried shields made of welded rebar and doors ripped from ruined buildings. They pushed toward the gate and a living wall. Aria swung the machine gun toward them and opened fire. The recoil vibrated through her entire body as she cut through the shield line. Still they advanced, stepping over the fallen, closing the distance step by step. Grenades, she ordered. Dalen and 2 others lobbed grenades into the advancing mass. The explosions tore the assault apart, scattering debris and bodies. The rebels fell back momentarily, regrouping behind outcrops. The fighting raged for hours, shifting in relentless waves. Each time the rebels pushed, Aria countered. Each time they adapted, she anticipated. Her knowledge of their culture, their pride, their fears, their tendencies to rally around certain rhythms and chants allowed her to predict when they would surge, when they would retreat. But exhaustion was creeping in. Ammunition was running low. Water was nearly gone. Sunlight beat mercilessly on the ridge as the heat climbed. Her soldiers fought with cracked lips and shaking hands. When the sun began to dip, casting the plateau in long, ominous shadows, Aria sensed a shift in the rebels' movements. Their fire slackened. Their formations dispersed and reformed. She felt something pulling the breath from the air. Then she heard a horn. Not the march of reclamation this time, but the call of last resort. Radek Vorn was committing everything to one final assault. Aria looked around at her men, dust-covered, battered, but still holding their lines. She stepped into the courtyard and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "They will throw their full weight at us now," she said. "Not because we are weak, but because we have held. This ridge stands because you stand, and if we fall today, we fall knowing we held the line long enough for the capital to prepare. But I'll tell you this. Radek Vorn believes he knows this land better than we do. He believes he knows me. Let's prove him wrong." Dalen raised his fist. "Outpost 7 holds." The soldiers echoed him, voices rising from raw throats. When the rebels charged, the earth itself seemed to shake. Hundreds of boots thundered across the plateau, accompanied by the grinding of a remaining armored truck, its weapon blazing. Aria took position behind her machine gun for what she knew would be the final stand. Smoke drifted across the ridge as bullets tore through the air. The rebels reached the outer wall. Grappling hooks clanged against stone. Fighters began to climb. "Cut the hooks," Aria ordered. Her soldiers slashed ropes with bayonets, kicking down climbers. But more came, scaling the walls with furious determination. The armored truck slammed into the gate, metal screaming as it buckled inward. Aria swung the machine gun toward the truck. She fired at its tires, at its grill, at the exposed edges of its improvised armor. The barrel glowed red, the belt ran dry. "Reload," she called. Dalen struggled to slam in a new belt under fire. Aria seized a rifle from a fallen soldier and fired at the truck's windshield. The glass cracked. A second shot broke through. The driver slumped and the truck veered, grinding against the gate at an angle. "Grenade in the engine," she shouted. Elam hurled a grenade. It landed perfectly. The explosion blew the hood open and sent flames roaring skyward. The truck caught fire, blocking the gate but also creating a smoldering, climbable barrier. Rebels scrambled over it. The courtyard erupted into brutal hand-to-hand combat. Aria fired point-blank, then swung the butt of her rifle into a charging fighter. She felt bone crack. Another rebel lunged with a knife. She twisted, disarmed him, and drove him back with a shot. Dalen fell beside her with a shout, wounded in the arm. She dragged him behind cover and kept firing. The rebels were swarming now, too many, too fast. Then she saw him. Radek Vorn climbed over the burning truck, coat singed, face streaked with sweat and soot. His eyes locked onto hers through the chaos. "Aria Senko," he roared. "This ends now." She rose from behind the sandbags, rifle raised. "It ends when you stop destroying the country you claim to protect." He charged. She fired. The bullet grazed his side, but he kept coming. They collided in a struggle that sent them crashing against the parapet. He swung a heavy punch. She ducked, but his second blow caught her ribs. Pain exploded through her. She elbowed him in the throat, breaking his grip momentarily. "You could have joined us," he growled, gasping for breath. "You understood the North, you understood us." "I still do," she said, wrenching his arm and forcing him against the wall. "But I also understand what you've become." He roared and hurled her backward. She slipped on loose gravel, catching herself at the last second before the drop. He raised his knife, a shot cracked. Radek froze, eyes wide. The knife slipped from his fingers. He fell to his knees, then collapsed face first on the stone. Behind him, trembling and pale, stood Elam, his rifle shaking in both hands. Aria breathed hard, chest heaving. "Good shot," she whispered. The rebels saw their commander fall. A ripple of shock moved through their ranks. Their assault faltered, then broke. Fighters began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. The remaining trucks backed away. Gunfire dwindled, then ceased altogether. Silence settled over the ridge like a heavy blanket. Aria staggered to her feet, leaning against the parapet for balance. Her soldiers gathered around her, exhausted, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Dalen clutched his bandaged arm. "Captain, we held." She nodded slowly. "Yes, we held." In the fading light, she looked out over the plateau where bodies lay scattered among the stones, where smoke drifted in thin ribbons, where the echoes of war still clung to the air. And she felt the grief beneath the triumph, the weight of every choice, every loss, every life that had ended on this ridge. Her men asked what they should do next. She steadied herself and said softly, "Signal the capital. Tell them the pass is secure." As Dalen moved to the radio, Aria stepped to the edge of the outpost, staring at the horizon where the rebel banners had once risen like flames. The wind carried the scent of ash and earth, and somewhere below a single horn sounded, a somber note of retreat. She closed her eyes. She thought of the past, of villages where she had once collected stories, of faces now lost to war. She thought of Radek Vorn and the man he had been before violence hollowed him out. And she thought of the cost she and her soldiers had paid to keep the capital alive for one more day. When her eyes opened again, the world felt quieter. "This outpost," she whispered, "was never just stone. It was sacrifice defiance, legacy." In the years that followed, historians would speak of the Battle of Targov Pass as the turning point of the Northern War. They would write of strategy and terrain, of numbers and logistics. But those who had fought at the Machine-Gun Outpost knew the truth, that its defense had been held together not by walls or weapons, but by the will of a woman who refused to abandon the ridge, even when it seemed hopeless. Captain Aria Senko's name became a symbol, not of conquest, but of resilience. She was remembered as the leader who understood the stories of her enemies yet never surrendered her own. Her stand inspired negotiations that shaped the war's end, and her writings became foundational to the peace that slowly emerged. But on that evening, as the sky deepened into twilight and the wind whispered across the stones, Aria thought only of the quiet, of the way the ridge breathed again after a long day of violence, of the fragile, aching possibility that something better could grow from the suffering. She sat beside the silent machine gun, hands still trembling, and allowed herself one moment, just one, to breathe, to grieve, to hope. For in the legacy of the Machine-Gun Outpost lay not the memory of destruction, but the enduring truth that even in the darkest hours, a single determined stand can change the course of a nation.